We're beginning this evening with Whalebone's video. As I say, imagine you're in a forest. Imagine the sun is dappling through, there's bird song, you're surrounded by trees, and in the distance, you hear a guitar playing. And here's the visual to help you imagine that just a little more.
Have you ever stood in a woodland and closed your eyes, even for a few moments? A wood has a soundscape unlike any other space, full of atmosphere and half-heard murmurings.
It's a place laden with mystery and hidden life, of unseen creatures and otherworldly spirits. And perhaps when we walk in a woodland, we're subconsciously picking up on something not imaginary, but very real.
Trees are alive in ways that we might never imagine. Pioneering research by Suzanne Simard has shown that trees communicate with each other and with other species using bonds that have come to be known as the Wood Wide Web, at the centre of which lie the mother trees. They nurture their offspring, warn each other of danger, and live in harmony with their neighbours.
But maybe we've known this all along. Way back in the distant past, our ancestors revered and worshipped trees. They knew that each type of tree had special and unique properties and characteristics, and respected them for it.
The indigenous Coast Salish peoples of North America knew of the connections beneath the forest floor and believed that a forest was made up of nations of trees, all living in harmony.
Perhaps they could communicate with trees in ways that we have forgotten. Perhaps they could connect with the spirit of trees in ways that we have lost. Wood sprites, fairies, dryads, are these really the spirits of trees talking to us? And are we willing to listen?
In the modern world, we disregard anything that doesn't work in a human way or speak in a language we understand. Maybe trees are talking to us all the time, but we've lost the ability to hear their wisdom.
A lot of our music is inspired by nature. 3 recent tunes we've written, Ghosts of Trees, Hollow Egg and True Story, have been specifically about trees and the spaces between them.
As we have learned more of how trees communicate, we wondered if we could listen deeper to their voices. Not just the wind in the leaves, the branches creaking, but what a tree really sounds like from the inside.
When we started to listen to sounds not normally heard by the human ear, things started to get really interesting. We wanted to share some of these sounds with you and our thoughts about trees and our relationships with them over time.
trees' lives span a timescale that is hard to grasp in human terms. It's mind-boggling to stand next to a living being that took its first breath in the Middle Ages, but stand next to a venerable old oak or a churchyard yew, and you were doing just that.
How many human generations have passed under these ancient boughs? How many have heard the voices of the trees?
In Kate Innes's novel Greencoats, trees have a message to pass on to those who can hear it. Will anyone learn from the trees' wisdom?
Perhaps there is a question there for us all.
I think everybody will agree with me that that video is absolutely exquisite, and I've had the privilege of watching it a few times now, and I just love it. It's so beautiful. Thank you very much, Stephen Shaw. It's gorgeous.
Thank you, Kate.
Thank you.
Just to reiterate that there is going to be another chance to view it because it's on your YouTube channel. Is that right?
Yeah, we'll post the link in the chat. It's not set to public yet, so if people want to watch it retrospectively, they can do. And if you do, it's a good idea to put earphones in for the tree bit anyway, because it's such a low sound that if you're listening to it on a computer or on a mobile phone, you might not pick up all the detail, you know. So you get the most out of it if you put some headphones on.
Definitely, yeah. I had the privilege of doing that, well, listening to some of the work you've been doing recently, and it was rather mind-blowing, really.
Yeah.
I loved it.
Yeah.
So I've just got a few questions for you two, just about your creative practice in relation to trees. So I wondered whether you have a tree or a woodland that you find most inspiring.
Not really a favourite, but not far from the studio where we are now, which is just south of Bridgnorth, there were a couple of hedgerow oaks. We had a few days of wandering around measuring oak trees to see how old they were, and there were a couple of hedgerow oaks which are between 200 and 300 years old, which is not that old in oak terms, but I like those particularly, and they're about 5 minutes walk from here.
Perfect.
Yeah, I walk past a massive horse chestnut tree twice a day, and you know, since we've been kind of getting into recording trees or whatever, you're walking past it thinking, I wonder what that sounds like inside, and I wonder how old it is. So yeah, resisting the urge to get a tape measure out and measure the trunk. It can become a bit obsessive.
Yeah. I know someone who's got that obsession, Michael. Right. Well, the other thing I was intrigued by was whether you feel, because you're both guitar players, whether you feel that the guitar is a particularly suitable instrument to express and explore trees and music.
I think we both think it is, really. Obviously, most guitars are made of wood. And a lot of guitars are made of really, really old wood, really old trees. So it's kind of magical to think that you're making music and creating vibrations, sound through a tree that's no longer alive, but maybe it is alive through music. So yeah, that's my opinion anyway.
Yeah, I think it's changed things a bit as well since with this discovering about trees and recording the sounds they make is fairly new to us. But when we realise that when you look at a guitar and when you hold a guitar, that all the pieces of wood were alive at one point, maybe in different parts of the world, and it just adds another little dimension to know that you're playing something, and maybe you're giving an extended life to something that was once alive.
Yeah, an extended voice to it as well. The other thing that I just wondered about when I was looking at your video was, if I get stuck in my plot or I'm having trouble with a character, I often go for a walk in the woods. And I wondered whether, you know, you have the same problems when you're composing, and what do you do to get unstuck?
Well, first of all, yes, we do have the same problems. I think anyone who creates things has moments when you just can't think what on earth to do next. And what we generally do is get outside. Sometimes it's in a wood close to us, but other times it's just there are a couple of sunken lanes within. We've got a couple of little loops that we can walk, which take us about 10 minutes, and very often that frees things up for us.
Yeah, I mean, one of the advantages of lockdown, it's actually been 15 months tomorrow since we last performed in public. So this is the most public thing we've done for 15 months. So sorry if we appear a bit nervous. But one of the advantages is it kind of made our world quite small. So we had to just explore places like really local to the studio. And we're very lucky that, you know, we have countryside all around the studio. Very unlucky in terms of broadband speed. But most of the footage of the video that you've just seen was actually in a wood about 2 miles behind us. And it was filmed about 6 o'clock in the morning, because I had the bright idea of wanting to record the dawn chorus about the start of, well, about the second week of May, which meant picking Steve up at 4:30 in the morning, which made it feel like, well, yeah, it made 11 o'clock came, and we actually thought it was 3 days later than it was, but it was worth it. But you know, standing in that woodland at that kind of time, you just realize how restorative and magical woodlands can be, really. So we hope we captured that in the video and managed to communicate that to everyone.
I think you definitely did. You definitely did. And I'm impressed by your dedication. So one final question. Do you think about trees differently now that you've heard them speak through your, you know, really interesting method of listening to them?
I think so. Well, no, I don't think so. I know so. First of all, it's having read, you know, done some recording, but also read a lot about this subject. When you realise that trees are communicating with one another, but just in a different way to the way we communicate, it definitely makes you feel. I think Oliver Rackham said you mustn't think of trees as gateposts with leaves, and they're not just lumps of wood. They're communicating to themselves. And I had a thought today. It's odd that for years we've talked about little green men on Mars, and you know, what if some aliens came to Earth, and would we be able to communicate with them? And in fact, we don't have to do that. It's our neighbours are communicating in a different language, and it'd be really interesting if we, you know, I wonder if thousands of years ago people were more in tune with this, humans were more in tune with this sort of thing, which makes me wonder whether animals and birds are more in tune with it. Maybe maybe they pick up on. So there was something on Spring Watch the other day about when oak trees get infested with a particular caterpillar, they give off some sort of chemical which attracts blue tits who feed on these caterpillars. I mean, it's
amazing.
Yeah,
you know, something. Yeah. Sorry, I waffled on a bit there.
Not at all. Not at all.
Just to say as well, the lady that Steve mentioned in the video, Suzanne Simard, she's kind of this pioneer of the Wood Wide Web, if you've heard of that. So she's done loads of research and dedicated her life to researching all the networks that trees use to help one another and to help different species as well. and we'll post a couple of links in the chat about her, because she does a really good TED talk, which is really interesting, but she's also just released a book called The Mother Tree, so it's well worth a read. But yeah, we just want to congratulate you, Kate, as well on your book, Green Coats. We both read it, and we just thought it was wonderful. So
thank you so much. Thank you too. I think what you've created in that video is truly beautiful, and I really appreciate it. And I think we could talk about trees all night.
yes.
We really could, but we need to move on, because now we're talking about a different aspect of forests and trees. And Suzanne Thomas is going to be giving us a talk about the folklore of trees, particularly I think in Shropshire, focusing on the wonderful beliefs that have risen up around trees. Suzanne is a folklorist, she is a storyteller, she is an expert in Shropshire nature words and a lover of nature. So I'm going to hand over to you, Suzanne.
Hello. That's not so much a talk as a ramble. I love trees, basically. I grew up in one. We had this yew tree in our garden. It was about 200 years old, apparently. And it was very, very black and dusty from the pollutants of the Industrial Revolution. And my mom didn't like me climbing it, but I did. And so I would go and sit in its branches, and I'd be one of Robin Hood's outlaws looking out for the Sheriff of Nottingham. And just, I think having that childhood friend, I had a little Wendy house underneath the tree, but I used that to climb on the roof up into the tree. Didn't like Wendy houses, but yeah. So I've always loved trees. I was thinking a perfect sentence for it would be, if I can. I would rather walk in a wood than anywhere else on earth. When I was young, we went to Woodbury Common down in Devon. And there's like a hill fort there, but now there's loads of tall beech trees growing there, and just running through those was amazing when I was young. We used to go to Sutton Park and run through the woods there, but I always had to keep to the path, couldn't run off. So now I don't keep to paths. But folklore of trees, growing up, I never, read any folklore books because they weren't widely available. So when I eventually found tree folklore books, it always seemed to be about trees that didn't grow where I lived. It was either Scottish traditions or Irish traditions or Native American traditions. And I was like, well, what about where we live? What about the yew tree in my garden? And it turns out it was actually a boundary marker, because that where my mom's old house was built was called Magdalene's Peace. So that tree was a boundary marker, which is really cool. So when I found this book, it's full of little snippets, and there's some lovely folklore-y things. It's most trees are either protection or unlucky. There's kind of no in between. So I've because I've not got long to talk, you'll be delighted to know. I've chosen 4 of my favourite trees, starting with the holly. Now I'm going to use some Shropshire words here as well. Now, free holly isn't the stuff you nick. It's the smooth upper foliage of the common holly. And down in Burford, which is just the Shropshire side of Tenbury, they didn't bring anything but free holly into their houses over midwinter. And the thing is, you said about holly, well, everybody knows the kind of traditions of bringing holly in for midwinter, but we're approaching midsummer, so I'm not going to mention. So other than to say that holly is a good protection because of the spiky bits on the leaves. So holly is rather wonderful for that. Up in Ellesmere, they have this thing where there's a frittening in every holly bush. If you're not familiar with the Shropshire Word Book, a frittening is a ghost, an apparition. Basically, there's a frittening to be seed. So don't go near any holly trees near Ellesmere because, yes. Its scarlet berries are known as a witch deterrent. So if you want to keep the witches away, put some holly berries out. And a holly tree outside the house, especially a self-sown one, brings good luck and protection from lightning, fire, and the evil eye. A lot of them do that, apparently. The hawthorn. There's Charlotte Byrne, the editor of this book. She says there's surprisingly little folklore about hawthorn, being as it's a very prolific plant. There's lots of it in hedgerows, there's lots of it in fields. Around, you know, I mean, if you've been driving anywhere recently around Shropshire, you will have seen these cascades of white blossom everywhere. But there's not much mentioned in Shropshire folklore. So it's unlucky to bring the hawthorn into the house. Unless you bring in a piece of hawthorn on Holy Thursday, presumably before it's bloomed, because that will protect the house from lightning. But it must be bought from a distance by somebody who isn't a resident of the house and isn't, I just got to admit somebody, there we go, like somebody who isn't a resident of the house or a member of that family. So you basically have to like text someone, say, can you get me some holly on your way back to the village, kind of thing. So hawthorn, bringing it into the house, when it's in bloom, I go down the lane and I shove my face in it because the fresh smell of the blossom is just so beautiful. But if you pick it and bring it, and it starts to decay, and it releases a chemical called trimethylamine. Don't know how to say that, I read it. And it's found in hawthorn blossom, but it's also found in decaying animal tissue. So they used to think that bringing hawthorn into the house was unlucky because it smelled to death. And so we can link that back to this rotting tissue smell, and you can understand why you wouldn't want that in the house. I didn't realize that elder has a beautiful smell while it's on the tree. You bring it into I used to work at a playgroup. I brought some in to show the children, left it there overnight, and then the next morning the whole place smelled of cat wee. And I really got told off for bringing in elder, so don't do that. It's not a good one. Then we've got one of my favourite one. Not my absolute favourite, but one of my favourite trees is rowan. Now, rowan, Charlotte Byrne quotes, the antidote par excellence against all manner of witchcraft, which is rather fascinating. A churn staff made of rowan wood, you have to use that in the dairy, or the butter will be bewitched. Okay, if you put a stave of rowan in the milk churn, it will prevent it being injured by witchcraft. And there's a lot of things about rowan protection. You tie twigs together with red thread and you hang it on a beam and keep the witches away. They used to make necklaces of rowan beads, rowan berries, and hang them on the horns of cattle just over the border in Herefordshire. And that is very sticky to do because I've done it. So I haven't got it with me, but yes. But the interesting thing about the having the rowan in the milk is that rowan, obviously, that the name is sorbus. It contains sorbic acid, which is a preservative. So if you put the rowan in, the sorbic acid will keep the milk fresh. Which I was like, there is science in this, fact and folklore in one happy little thing. The yew tree doesn't feature in much folklore in Shropshire, but in the Shropshire folklore, there is noted of the on Palm Sunday up at Pontisbury, they all go up the hill to look for the golden arrow. There is a book of that name by Mary Webb. And they will go up to find the golden arrow, but only the seventh son of the seventh son would be able to find it. But they didn't have any palm trees. So they went and took a sprig from the haunted yew tree. It doesn't say which is the haunted tree or what it's haunted by. You take a sprig of that, and the first one to get that would and bring it back down to the village would be would have luck for the rest of the year. So I just love trees, and when you write songs about them for arts projects, and you go past them in your car, they've started waving at me, which is rather nice. So yes, well, Steve and Charlotte in their video were saying about communicating with trees. I talk to them all the time. There's an oak tree down our lane, and we call it the whispering oak, because you walk past it and the leaves rattle and you can have a conversation with it, which is rather lovely. Even when there's no breeze, it rattles, so it's quite lovely. But that's enough about me and trees. I think I've whittled on for long enough. So I am now going to introduce Kate, who is that side of me on my screen, and somewhere on your screens you will find Kate. And she has written an absolutely gorgeous book. She's written several gorgeous books. This is her latest. It was released in May, and it's wonderful. She's going to put a link in there in the chat. So yes, it is a primarily a children's book, but it appeals to me. I'm sure it will appeal to everybody here because it's about trees. And but one thing Kate is saying that she will donate £1 for every book sold to the Woodland Trust. We will also be having we have set up a Just Giving page for the Woodland Trust, so that they can help to preserve these beautiful environments and for future generations, and replant them when the big ones fall and things like that. So Kate is going to talk about her wonderful book, and then I'm going to ask her some questions. So I will mute me and go ahead, Kate.
Thank you so much, Suzanne, for that really generous introduction. I've just popped the information that Kath asked for about how to buy copies of Greencoats into the chat. And I will also have a screen of how to do that if you want to see it later. But I found that folklore of Shropshire trees really fascinating. And you'll see that as I do a little presentation before I do the reading of the book, some of those same themes will come up, because I think trees really do speak to so many of us, and we feel it individually, but it's such an important collective experience of humankind with trees. So I'm going to show you a few slides. If I just share my screen now. Ooh, that's interesting. Yes, as you can probably tell, we're not entirely professional about Zoom, but we do our best. So hopefully you're going to see it. Can you see my slides? Just wave. Oh, good. Okay, so I have a phrase in Welsh which I am not going to offend your ears by trying to pronounce, because I can't. But it means to return to a balanced state of mind, and apparently literally translated is to return to my trees. And I think that's a beautiful way of acknowledging the huge impact that trees have on our landscape as human beings. And they certainly did on my landscape as a child growing up. As Suzanne also said, I really felt that trees were my friends, and I didn't find forests frightening at all. I found them very much where I wanted to be, like being at home. And I think that was partly because I grew up in New England, surrounded by trees in Connecticut. And I spent a lot of time out in the woods and exploring the minutiae of the forest, and also the the majesty of it and seeing just how elaborate all the habitats were. And I moved to England quite a few years ago, and I now live in Shropshire, lucky me. And of course, the woods here are different from the New England woods. They are extraordinarily beautiful. They're very, been through a lot of management over centuries and millennia. And they've accrued all this magic and meaning, so many stories, so much cultural importance in, you know, Bluebell Woods and the various different trees. We heard a lot about the folklore from Suzanne. And alongside others, I can't help but feeling that I'm amongst friends when I'm amongst trees. And as you can see, sometimes they make themselves a little bit more obvious than others. But this character was looking at me while I was walking around the Wrekin, and I had to record him for posterity. And I knew that when I became a writer after a career in teaching and archaeology, I knew I would write a children's book set in the woods. It was inevitable. But it took me a while to work out which woods. And eventually I settled upon this beautiful little strip of woodland at the start of Wenlock Edge, very near to where I live, right next to a quarry, and it's on limestone, and that's important for the story because it's absolutely full of fossils, and it has a very otherworldly quality to it. So I was looking at that sense of there being another world, as well as the forest. What else was hidden amongst the trees and in amongst the animals and other plants? So I started looking at the folklore and the superstitions, and I came across this old tome when I was at the Gladstone Library, and it was so useful, so many wonderful beliefs about plants and trees and animals. That came into the plot of the book. And indeed, the book itself, Traditions, Superstitions and Folklore by Charles Hardwick, is in the story. And a very important part of the plot are those red-berried trees. So the red berries being a way of protecting oneself against harmful magic or harmful otherworldly influences. So the holly, you may have seen the front cover of the book, the holly became a living spirit, a tree spirit, who was very much mischievous in his workings in the plot. And there are many other incidents in the plot of the rowan, the hawthorn to a lesser extent, but also these other red-breasted, red-touched animals are deemed to be really benevolent to humans, and the robin comes into it very strongly. Photo credit to my son, John, here for that lovely photo. So I had the world of the book, I had the wood, I had the other world. I just had to write it. And again, my son John was very useful in this because I wrote a chapter a day and then I read it to him that evening. And he was able to provide some really useful feedback. And once the story was ready and I'd edited it and gone over it and done the research into the setting, which is World War II during the Birmingham Blitz, I needed to find an illustrator who could do it justice, particularly in the front cover. And I think everyone who's seen it, I think, agrees that Anna Streetley, who produced this beautiful drawing for the cover, did a wonderful job. And she really embodied Gelin, the holly spirit, incredibly well. She also did some beautiful motif drawings for the interior of the story. And this is one of my favorites. He just looks so ready to create havoc. So there's some information there which I can share again at the end about how to get hold of the book. for the next 2 days, so you don't have to leap to buy a copy right now. You can take your time. If you're buying from overseas, it's probably best to email me and I will try to arrange the best way of getting you a signed copy. If you don't mind about it being signed and you're overseas, then I'm afraid to say Amazon is probably your best bet because of Brexit. But there we are, we won't talk about that anymore. So if you're interested in a book, all the information is available, and I'll happily share it again. So I'm going to do a reading now from the book, and the reading takes place quite early on in the story. And I should introduce you to a few of the people that you will meet in this reading, because otherwise you might think, what on earth is she talking about? So Gwen is the main character, and Gwen is 10 years old, and she has been evacuated from Birmingham because a bomb exploded in her street. And she's gone to stay with her aunt, who lives in Shropshire near Wenlock Edge and is very eccentric. Her aunt has a wonderful dog called Boo, who is really scruffy and very much beloved, because her aunt believes that when her husband died, he sent her the dog to keep her company. The other character you'll meet is Eddie, and Eddie is Gwen's new friend who lives just down the road from her in Wigwig, which is a wonderful Shropshire name. And he is a farmer's son, and they're very new friends. They've only just met, really. But Eddie is taking Gwen up into the woods, into Quarry Wood, to look for fossils, and he's just found one. He held the stone up for her to see. It was crawling with shapes. "What's that?" she asked, pointing to a branching tree-like thing with lots of holes like a pincushion. "A piece of coral, one of my favorites. Look at this one. It's part of a sponge like you'd use in the bath." He laughed, shaking his hair out of his eyes. "Is that a snail?" "Yes, a sea snail. All these plants and animals lived in a tropical sea because all this land used to be south of the equator." "That can't be true," Gwen said. "That's thousands of miles away." "It is true. This is some of the oldest rock in the world, and it used to be much further south." Eddie was still looking at the fossils. He pointed to one that was a round tube. This one was a bit like an anemone. He handed the stone to Gwen. She sat down on the ground and stared at it. There were so many, little scallop shells and sections of plants that looked a bit like bamboo. Eddie was bent over the satchel, undoing the buckles. Gwen looked up at the rock face. "Is it all like this?" "It is here. It changes down in the valley. Even around your stream in Netherwood, there are different fossils." He held up the wrapped sandwiches. "Are you hungry?" Gwen looked around for Boo. He wasn't there. "Boo's gone again. Can you whistle him?" Eddie stood up and blew a long blast and 3 short ones. "If Boo's that clever, he should know Morse code." "Oh, ha ha," Gwen said, getting up herself. Again, she had that strange pricking feeling on her hands and neck. It would be awful to lose her aunt's dog, especially as she believed that Anders had sent him. That was not something Gwen could explain to Eddie, however. Eddie saw her expression and whistled again. Faintly, in the distance, there was a high-pitched whine, then a short bark, again high-pitched. "He's stuck somewhere. That's the sound they make when they're frightened," Eddie said, already running down onto the path, the satchel and sandwiches abandoned. Gwen raced after him. The sound had come from further north and up the hill. Perhaps the path would turn that way. "Boo!" she shouted, hoping he would keep barking so they could locate him. "Boo!" There was another short bark and a whine, like brakes screeching. Eddie pointed into the trees, barely slowing down. "Up there, by the Bluebell clearing." They stumbled up the hill, scrambling over fallen trees and stones, and burst through the shade into a small patch of sunlight at the top. A glade surrounded by elder trees, laden with berries. The barking was loud and frantic, but at first Gwen couldn't see where Boo was. She shouted for him again, but her voice seemed to die as it left her mouth. She looked at Eddie, who had stopped on the edge of the clearing. His mouth was open, panting a little, his eyes wide. Gwen clapped her hands and cleared her throat to call the dog. The feeling of pricking was making the hair stand up on her head. "Where is he?" she whispered. Eddie took a step forward and whistled. This time they heard growling. It came from the other side of the clearing, where a large yew tree threw a patch of darkness on the ground. They sprinted across the clearing towards it. He was there, standing with his paws on the yew trunk, growling and scratching at it, saliva dripping from his muzzle, his eyes wild. "Boozle," Gwen called, but it came out as a croak. Her chest ached from running. She approached him, holding out her hand, but Boo didn't look at her. It was as if he were caught around his legs by an invisible rope. "He must be after something in the tree," Eddie said, his voice high and strange. He was standing stock still, staring at the twitching, growling dog. Gwen went slowly towards Boo. As she came under the yew, it became cold, winter cold. She looked up into the heavy branches. At first she could see nothing but dark green needles and red berries. An even colder draught made her shiver violently, but Gwen crossed her arms and stared up again. A long, pale arm, fingers rigid and outstretched, was reaching down from the middle of the yew towards the dog. Gwen's heart pounded in her chest. The white fingers were pointing straight at Boo. He had stopped barking and was staring upwards, mouth open, as if in a trance. Stop there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kate. That's lovely. It's gripping. I love that book. I have some questions for you, Kate, if you don't mind. My first question is, the characters in it are amazing. Are they based on people that you know?
No, not really at all. I think Aunt Tiny, she came fully formed into the book. She's just a wonderfully artistic, sort of quite eccentric and warm person. And I think everyone would love an aunt that was like Aunt Tiny, really. She's just lovely. And Gwen, I think, as well, she isn't based on anyone in particular, except maybe, it inevitably partly my younger self, I suppose, but only very, very tangentially. And Gellin, again, the Holly spirit, he just arrived, and I know that I'm on the right track when characters just arrive and fully announce themselves without any problems on my part in trying to define what they're like. They just are who they are. So it was a story that flowed quite easily from that point of view.
Your previous work has been aimed at a more adult audience. Did you find it easier writing a children's book, or was it more challenging?
Well, the type of adult fiction I write is historical fiction set mainly in the medieval period, and it's very it's fascinating, but it involves a lot of research. And this writing the children's book initially, the actual first draft was just a complete joy. It was really straightforward and wonderful for me. I felt after quite a lot of hard slog in other aspects of my writing that this one was really joyful to write, and writing for my son again made it very special. Then the editing and everything that came after that was very hard to do, but yeah, it was good.
Was there any part of it that you found emotionally difficult to write? because some of it's a tiny little bit emotionally difficult to read.
Yeah. Yeah. I know. I'm not sure why that always happens, but it quite often does in my work. So Gwen has experienced a lot of loss, and she is afraid that she's going to lose even more because of the war and because her parents are, well, her mother particularly is in Birmingham, and the bombs are dropping all the time. And I suppose I think a lot about the experience of refugees today, how worried they must be about their families. And I think there's a lot of focus on why are they coming here? But when we think about our history in World War II, we experienced bombing, and it has a huge and profound effect on the psyche. And I felt that it was important for Gwen to have a big experience, a big, bold experience where she can take some control over her life. And that I was pleased that that could happen in the story, that a lot of the things that she had no control over, she could actually sort of defuse through this wonderful otherworldly adventure. But yeah, some of it was hard to, going back to your original question, some of it was very hard to write. Yeah.
Well, thank you very much. If you have any questions for Kate, please put them in the chat and we'll look at them at the end. But for now, for the final entertainment of the evening, we have the legendary Red Hot Bard. He told me to say that. Andy Harrop-Smith. You can unmute yourself now, love.
Am I unmuted? Then I'm in full voice. Can you hear me? Yes. Well, hello, everybody. My name's Andy, and I'm a storyteller. And I'm honoured to be here tonight. Kate asked me to come and tell a story about trees or a tree or whatever it might be. And to do that, I went out. I've got a beautiful horse chestnut tree in the garden. And I went out, I spoke to my horse chestnut tree, as often I do. And I took with me my pipe. I love to go and play tunes to the trees on my pipe. And I came up with this little tune, and it's called To a Horse Chestnut. The smithy had gone, the village blacksmith had gone at this stage because he doesn't like my pipe playing. But here we go, I'll give it a try. And that was To a Horse Chestnut Tree. Oh, thank you. For any sort of applause is always welcome. A long, long time ago, when tigers smoked pipes and bears wore slippers, there was a woodcutter and his wife. And they lived in the middle of nowhere. But, well, nowhere's got to be somewhere, and somewhere can't be anywhere. But this was in the middle of a place called the Mortimer Forest, which is just outside Ludlow in Shropshire. And one day the woodcutter said to his wife, he said, "I'm hungry." And she said, "I'm not surprised you're hungry. You are the laziest, most idle woodcutter in the whole of Mortimer Forest. If you went out and did a decent, honest day's work, then you could cut some wood and you could go down to the market in Ludlow and sell it. You could buy some food, and we wouldn't have to eat turnip soup every day, morning, noon, and night. Breakfast, lunch, and supper. We are so poor. Go and do a decent day's work and bring home some food." Well, the woodcutter and his wife often argued. If he said black, she said white. If he said left, she said right. If he said up, she said down. If he said swim, she said drown. They argued from morning till night, and then they argued from night till morning, and then they argued whether it was morning or night or not. They couldn't do anything else but argue. And so he never got any work done. They were just too busy arguing all the time. But, well, his stomach was rumbling, and he thought, I need something else other than turnip soup, just for a change. And so he went out to the shed, and he got his biggest, his sharpest axe. And just to make sure it was sharp enough, he took a stone and he sharpened it even sharper. And he went off into Mortimer Forest. He went down the path that he always went down. And he was looking for a tree. He was looking for the perfect tree, a tree not too big, not too small, not too thin, not too tall. A tree just the right size, the best tree of all. Oh, he couldn't find it. He thought, I need to cut down such a good tree so I can take it to the market in Ludlow and sell it for a good price. And maybe I could buy some sausages, because I love sausages. But the woodcutter, well, he'd not had a sausage since he got married. And that was a long, long time ago. He kept on walking and walking and walking until he came to a part of the forest where he'd never been before. It was a little bit darker. And the trees, well, their leaves seemed to be a sort of a silvery colour. And when the wind blew, they tinkled. Tinkling in the wind, it's never a good idea. He walked further on down the path. It got darker, and there, before him, was an oak tree. Oh, this was the perfect tree. A tree that wasn't too big, it wasn't too small, it wasn't too thin, it wasn't too tall. It was just the right size. The best tree of all. He thought, if I cut down that tree, oh, it'll bring such an amazing price in Ludlow Market. I'll make so much money. I'll be able to go and buy some food. And I can buy some sausages. And that would be my heart's desire. Whoa. And so he took his axe. He took that sharp axe. He lifted it high above his head. And he began to bring it down towards the bark, towards the trunk of that tree. He was going to chop down that tree in 3 chops. And just before the axe hit the tree, hit the trunk of the tree, a voice cried out, "Oh, please don't cut down my tree." The woodcutter stopped in mid-swing. What was that? He'd heard something. He wasn't quite sure what it was. Well, he looked left and he looked right. He couldn't see anything. It must be his imagination. So he took his big axe again and he lifted it high above his head and he brought it down swift and sure and sharp and straight. And he was just about to hit the trunk of that tree. He was going to cut it down in 2 chops. When once again, "Oh, please don't cut down my tree." What was that? The woodcutter looked this way and he looked that way, but he couldn't see anything at all. It must be the wind playing tricks with his ears. 3rd time lucky. Why do people always spit on their hands? But they do. Apparently it helps you. He took that axe. He lifted it high above his head and he began to bring it down towards that tree with every single ounce of strength in his shoulders, swift and sure and sharp. And he was just about to chop that tree down in 1 chop when, "Oh, please don't cut down my tree." The woodcutter stopped in mid-swing. Well, he looked down and then he looked up. And he saw halfway up that tree a little man no more than 2 feet tall. That's 60 centimeters or 1.3 cubits because I looked it up. A little man with long green hair growing out of his head, growing out of his ears, growing down his nose, with a long green beard that grew all the way down to his belly button, down to his knees, down to his feet. A little man with long fingers like twigs that had little buds and leaves on the end. A little man with brown, wrinkly skin like the bark of a tree. He was an undercover policeman working for Special Branch. No, he wasn't. I just threw that in as an aside. Oh, my goodness. The woodcutter looked at the little man in the tree and he said, "Who are you?" And the little man said, "I am the spirit of this tree." I don't know where he came from. It was south of Alabama, I think. He said, "I am the spirit of this tree, and I have lived here for 500 years since the tree was a little tiny acorn. All trees have a spirit, and if you cut them down, the spirit will die." Oh, wow, the woodcutter's heart, it turned a leap. He was a good man. He couldn't cut down this tree so the little man would die. He was 500 years old. He said, "Okay, I'm not going to cut down your tree." He said, "In fact, I'm not going to cut down another tree in this forest ever again, because every tree has its own spirit." He was a good man, the woodcutter, and he turned round and he was just about to walk off down the track when the little man said, "Wait a minute." He said, "Wait a minute. You have a good heart, woodcutter, and I'm going to give you 3 wishes." 3 wishes, said the woodcutter. "So you're magic as well?" "Oh, we're all very magic." He said, "You can have whatever your heart desires." The woodcutter thought, "Oh, 3 wishes. I'll never have to work again." He thought, "I'll tell you what I'll do." He said, "Can I go back and share my wishes with my wife?" And the little man said, "You can have your wishes wherever you want to do." Oh, thought the woodcutter, we can wish for anything we want. Maybe we could wish for a big palace on the hill. Maybe we could wish for servants who could bring us food, breakfast, lunch, and tea, sausages for all day, morning, noon, and night. We could have sausages because they're my favorite food. I just love sausages. Oh, this is fantastic. Or maybe my 3rd wish could be a great big chest of gold. Oh, fantastic. I can't wait to get home and tell my wife. He thanked the little man because you must always thank the tree spirit. He waved him goodbye. "Goodbye, little man." The little man waved his twigs and said, "Goodbye, woodcutter." And the woodcutter went off. He went off down the path, back to the bit of the forest that he knew where it was lighter and the trees didn't have silver leaves, back to the little hut in the middle of Mortimer Forest that they shared with a fox, 2 badgers, a family of crows, and lots of creepy crawlies. His wife was waiting for him at the door, and her face was like thunder. "You lazy man," she said. "Where's the wood? Where's the money? Where's the food? Where have you been? You are just one lazy, idle, good-for-nothing woodcutter." He went in through the door. He said, No. Wait a minute. Before you start. He said, "The most amazing thing happened to me today. A little tree spirit appeared to me and gave me 3 wishes. We can wish for anything we want to do." He said, "It's absolutely fantastic." And he said, "Now what's for supper?" Well, she didn't believe him. She said, "Turnip soup, same as always." And she got this bowl of turnip soup. It was lukewarm and it all congealed on the top. And she put it in front of him and it looked horrible. And he knew that it tasted horrible. Oh, he thought, "I wish I'd just had a nice, big, fat, juicy sausage to make this soup taste a little better." The sky went dark there was a flash of lightning, and there was a roll of thunder. And suddenly, a sausage, a big, fat, juicy sausage, flew in through the window. It circled the room 3 times, and it came to land on the table in front of the woodcutter. Well, his mouth started to water, and his wife said to him, "Goodness gracious me, woodcutter," because he didn't have a name, he just called woodcutter. He said wife, because she didn't have a name either. She said, "You have got 3 wishes after all. It's true, you did meet a wood spirit and he was magic and he gave you 3 wishes. You stupid man," she said, "you've wished for a sausage. For 1 sausage. We could have had a pig full of sausages. You've wasted a whole wish on 1 sausage," she said. "I'm so cross with you. I wish that sausage was on the end of your nose." The sky went dark. There was a flash of lightning, and there was a roar of thunder, and that sausage leapt up in the air. It flew around the room 3 times in a clockwork direction, because sausages always fly clockwork. And yoink, it came to land on the end of the woodcutter's nose. Ow! Ow! Oh, he tried to pull it off, it wouldn't come off. Ow! He said, "I've got a sausage stuck on the end of my nose. You stupid woman! What have you done? You've wished the sausage on my end of my nose. What are we going to do now?" She said, "I've got an idea." And off she went, and she got the axe. And ow! "Stop it," he said, "because I can tell you now that that sausage was as much a part of the woodcutter as were his fingers and his toes. They couldn't get that sausage off, no matter how hard they pulled. That sausage was stuck on the end of the woodcutter's nose." "You silly woman, we had 3 wishes. We wasted 1, we wasted 2. We've only got 1 wish left now. What are we going to wish for?" His wife said, "Well, we can still have a great big chest of treasure, can't we? We can buy lots with that. We could still have a palace on the hill and servants to bring us food morning, noon and night. But I can't go through life with a sausage on my nose." And to be honest, his wife thought, I don't think I could live with a man who had a sausage on the end of his nose either. And so, well, if you were a live audience, I'd say, what was the 3rd wish going to be? But I know what you're all thinking. Let's go for the chest of gold. We'll try living with a man with a sausage on his nose. But of course, at the end of the story, we have to have the wife says, "I wish the sausage wasn't on the end of your nose." And the skies went dark. There was a flash of lightning. There was a even longer roll of thunder, and that sausage, it leapt in the air. It flew around the room 3 times. In which direction? Clockwise. And it came to land on the table in front of the woodcutter. And so, well, all their wishes had been wasted, because that's what arguing gets you. Nothing at all. Except, of course, for a great big fat juicy sausage. And I can tell you, well, the woodcutter and his wife, they never did get their palace on the hill. They never did get servants to serve them food morning, noon and night. And they never did get a great chest full of gold. But what they did get was the best sausage supper they'd had in their lives. So just remember that you can go out walking in the woods, and you can go out walking in Mortimer Forest. It's a magical place just near Ludlow, and you can go shopping in Ludlow Market as well. If we're allowed to do, I'm not too sure. Forest will tell us whether we can or not. But you can go. If you go to Ludlow Forest and you look at those trees, you might just find that oak tree that is still there to this very day, with that little man sitting on a branch, although I do believe he's grown a cubit or 2 by now. always remember there's magic in trees. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you, Andy. Never disappoint.
What I have to say, Kate, I've told that story many times. I kind of adjusted a few little bits, but the image of the tree spirit is the image that I've been telling for years. And certainly it was a long, long time before I saw the cover of the book. When I did see the cover of the book, I thought, whoa, actually, that is the holly brother of my oak tree spirit, because they're very much the same, aren't they? Isn't that amazing?
They are, yeah. I was just astonished when you started describing him, and I thought, that's Kellen, that's him. But obviously, each tree has their own. And I was just astonished when Anna Streetley illustrated the cover, and all she had to go on was my meanderings and the description in the story, and she just brought it to life. She's so talented.
Perfect. Lovely illustration.
Yeah.
Beautiful illustration. There we go.
So does anybody have any questions?
You can pop them in the chat if you want to ask anything. Or
There was one earlier about the rowan. Michael asked a question about rowan. Gavin Maxwell was cursed on a rowan, so it would seem that they can do harm as well as protect. Is that what you've read? I've read quite a few books on tree folklore, and yes, they can do harm as well. Depends who's using them, I suppose. I think any thing can be used to harm or heal, but I've not heard about the Gavin Maxwell incident. So if you want to enlighten me on that, Michael, then it'd be good to hear it.
shall we just Michael's my husband, I think. It's that, Michael?
It is. I've unmuted. Is that all right?
There you go.
Yeah,
Go
that's
for
fine.
it.
Yes, thank you. No, it's a great story. He was his first wife cursed him on the rowan outside his house up in Camasfiana, and he is meant to have died by the means of the curse. So he died unhappy and poor in the end, and she cursed him on the tree outside his house. So from what I understand, mountain ash rowan commonly are sources of being cursed upon, as it were. But I don't know any more about it. So I was interested if you'd read anything, Suzanne. So thank you. That's very interesting.
The interesting thing is that in a lot of the neo-paganism, rowan is seen as a magical tree, and so it doesn't actually keep witches away. So who knows? Maybe it's just an old crossover from like because maybe the pagans of old revered the rowan, and going over to Christianity, they go, oh no, you can't have that. It's a dangerous tree. We'll say it's about witchcraft. There's a lot of that in folklore. So yes.
There's a lot of neo-pagan witches that I'd like to keep away. So I think probably keeping a few rowan branches over the door is not such a bad idea.
Yes.
I just noticed a question in the chat from Joseph. Is Kate planning to write more children's books? And the answer is yes. Yay! There might be a sequel to Greencoats coming, and I've also had an idea, which I'm really keen to try out, about a very young archaeologist in the 1930s, children's book. So, yeah, so I think I've caught the bug. Sorry, Suzanne?
I want to read that.
Yeah.
I was hoping there would be a sequel because of how it kind of ends. There's more stories to be told, aren't there?
Yeah, there are. I mean, it's really just at the beginning of the war. It's 1940 when the action takes place, and lots happened in Birmingham after that point. So I think it's just at the beginning of September that the story finishes. And I've also heard recently from some people who live in the area who were alive during the Second World War, some really interesting information about things that happened when the Americans were based near here. And so there's lots more to look at. And obviously, forests and woodlands are an endless source of information and inspiration. So yeah, quite possibly.
And Kate, where did you get the names for tree spirits?
The names are the Welsh names. So I was looking in the traditions, superstitions, and folklore, and looking for ideas about how to define the names of the spirits, and in the end I had to come down to the Welsh names for trees as being the closest to the Celtic original name for that being, that living being. So yes, so they're all old Welsh names.
Okay, any more questions? Amy said that I love that Gwen is a wonderful girl hero, the boy psychic. Yes, girl power. That was really refreshing to see.
Yeah, I agree with you, and I'm also really heartened that a lot of young boys who've read it are gripped just as girls are, and it's a really useful, I think, way of exploring how you can have cross-gender friendships, and we do, and it's healthy, and it's normal to have friends who aren't just girls and just boys, and it offers a really lovely way of looking at different aspects of the same thing that's going on. So yeah, I felt that Gwen at the start of the story she's scared and she's unhappy, and through her adventures, she changes that, and she does it by action, by taking the initiative, which I really enjoyed writing about.
Eddie's a really nice character as well, isn't he? He's not kind of like, I'm going to rip branches off this tree and hit things with them. He's the care he takes over the fossils and the interest. I'd love to have had a friend like him. Yeah,
I've got such a soft spot for him. He's he's the youngest of several boys, and I think he was a bit bullied by his elder brothers, and he's sensitive. And again, I didn't make him up, as it were. I mean, I know I did, but I didn't, because he was already there and I knew all about him. So Eddie expresses quite a lot about how difficult it is to feel isolated, even in a place where you're meant to have lots of strong bonds.
Mm-hmm. Do you have any more questions or comments or anything? Jokes, songs, stories?
Well, it's been a really fascinating evening for me, because I just loved how the prompt of trees has drawn out so many different aspects, the folklore, the music, the storytelling. It's just been so nice to bring it together into one event, and I really appreciate the time that you've all given me, Suzanne and Stephen Shah and Andy. Thank you so much for being part of it. It's really great.
Well, thank you everybody for coming. Sorry, go on, Andy.
Sorry, it's worth at this stage saying that we actually didn't rehearse any of this. None of us knew what the others were going to do, really. Yeah. It just all came together, and I think it's just gelled so well. It kind of seems as if we've been rehearsing it for weeks and weeks and weeks, and we'd all worked out what we were going to do that fitted into somebody else's little bit as well. But it didn't. And I think it's just absolutely amazing how we were all really on the same branch.
Yeah.
Weren't we?
didn't.
And that's really nice. It's worked incredibly well. Incredibly well. And I've really enjoyed it. What a great evening. Thank you, Kate, for bringing us all together.
A pleasure. Thank you, Andy, for everything and for your story in particular. So I don't know if anybody wants me to share again the how to buy a book. I can do that. I'll pop it back in the chat. And if you do want to buy a book and you don't get all this information, the easiest thing to do is just Google me and my website will pop up and you can go through there. It's easy. Thank you. And thank you for supporting the Woodland Trust, which I think everybody knows we need to protect our forests. We need to protect our woodlands. And it takes a lot of effort because the impetus of most growth is to cut these treasured places down, and we need people who are dedicated to protecting them, and that's the Woodland Trust. So anything you can give to them would be a real bonus. Thank you.
Well, thank you everyone for coming. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your ears. And thank you to Folk for hosting this Zoom and helping to advertise it and bringing everyone together. So go off into the woods, hug a tree, listen to the spirits, and enjoy yourself. Okay, thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Everyone.
Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.